A waitress got his silent daughter to eat when no one else could. The Mafia boss hired her immediately, never knowing her late father and his dead wife share a secret that connects them all. Sophie Martinez wiped down table 7 for the third time that hour, her hands trembling slightly as she glanced toward the corner booth. The little girl sat there like a porcelain doll, perfectly still, perfectly silent, perfectly untouched by the world around her. "Don't even try," whispered Maria, the senior waitress, grabbing Sophie's elbow as she reached for a fresh napkin. "That's Lila Moretti, the boss's daughter. 3 nannies have quit this month. She won't eat for anyone." Sophie had only been working at La Vigna for 2 weeks, but she'd already learned the unspoken rules. Don't ask questions. Don't make eye contact with the men in dark suits who occupied the back tables. And absolutely, under no circumstances, approach Adrian Moretti's daughter without explicit permission. But something about the child gnawed at Sophie's chest, a hollow ache she couldn't explain. Lila's dark curls fell across her face as she stared at the untouched plate of pasta primavera before her. 6 years old, maybe 7. Old enough to feed herself, yet she sat there like she was waiting for something that would never come. "How long has she been like this?"
Sophie asked.
Maria's expression softened with pity. "Since her mother died. 8 months now. Mr. Moretti brings her here every Tuesday and Thursday evening. Orders her favorite meal. She never takes a bite." The kitchen doors swung open, and Sophie's manager, Vincent, emerged with another plate, this time chicken parmesan cut into perfect bite-sized pieces. He approached Lila's table with the careful movements of someone approaching a wild animal. "Lila, sweetheart," Vincent said, his voice unnaturally high and cheerful. "Look what Chef made special for you. Your favorite, remember?" The girl didn't even blink. Vincent set the plate down, waited a moment, then retreated with a defeated sigh. As he passed Sophie, he muttered, "Boss is watching from upstairs. If she doesn't eat tonight, he's going to lose it." Sophie's gaze drifted to the darkened windows of the private office overlooking the dining room. She couldn't see anyone, but she felt the weight of observation pressing down like a physical thing. The restaurant hummed with quiet conversation, the kind of muted elegance that came with white tablecloths and $100 bottles of wine. But the corner booth existed in its own pocket of silence, a bubble of grief that no one dared penetrate. Sophie turned back to her tables, determined to mind her own business. She had her own ghosts to outrun. 3 months ago, she'd left Chicago with nothing but a duffel bag and her father's old police badge, the only thing she had left of him. She'd promised herself a fresh start in New York, a quiet life.
No complications.
But when she glanced back at Lila, the girl's small shoulders were shaking. Sophie's feet moved before her brain could stop them. "Hey there," she said softly, sliding into the booth across from Lila. The child's head snapped up, eyes wide with surprise. They were the deepest brown Sophie had ever seen, pools of sadness that no 6-year-old should carry. "You know what I think," Sophie continued, picking up a fork and twirling it through the pasta. "I think this pasta is really, really lonely. Look at it. All dressed up with nowhere to go." Lila's lips twitched, almost a smile, but not quite. "And these little tomatoes?" Sophie speared one with the fork. "They're practically crying. They waited all day to be eaten by someone special, and now they're just sitting here getting cold. That's pretty sad, right?" The girl watched Sophie with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "I'll tell you a secret," Sophie leaned in conspiratorially. "When I was your age, I used to pretend my food was magic. Like, if I ate my vegetables, I'd get superpowers. Want to know what superpower this pasta gives you?" Lila's voice came out as barely a whisper, the first words anyone had heard from her in weeks. "What?" "The power to make waitresses stop worrying about you," Sophie said with a gentle smile. "Because honestly, I've been watching you from over there, and I'm pretty worried. You look like you could use a friend." Something shifted in Lila's expression, a crack in the armor of silence she'd built around herself. Her small hand reached out, not for the fork, but for Sophie's fingers. The touch was feather-light, tentative, like testing whether Sophie was real. "Will you stay?" Lila asked. "While you eat." "Absolutely." Sophie loaded the fork with pasta and held it out, not pushing, just offering. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, Lila leaned forward and opened her mouth. The restaurant didn't stop moving. Conversations didn't pause. But Sophie felt the shift nonetheless, like the entire room had just exhaled after holding its breath for months. Lila chewed slowly, her eyes never leaving Sophie's face. "Good?" Sophie asked. A tiny nod. "Want another bite?" Another nod. They continued like that, Sophie feeding Lila small bites while talking about nothing important. The weather. The funny-shaped cloud she'd seen that morning. A stray cat that lived in the alley behind her apartment building. Lila didn't say much, but she listened. And more importantly, she ate. Sophie didn't notice the shadow falling across their table until a deep voice cut through their bubble. "Who the hell are you?" She looked up into the face of Adrian Moretti, and her breath caught. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe late 30s, with sharp features that could have been carved from marble. His suit was immaculate, his dark hair swept back, but it was his eyes that held her captive. Gray as storm clouds, and twice as dangerous.
I'm Sophie.
"I work here. I was just—" "Daddy." Lila's voice rang out, clear and bright. "This is my friend Sophie." She made the pasta, not lonely anymore. Adrian's expression didn't soften, but something flickered behind his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or disbelief. His gaze moved from Sophie to his daughter, taking in the half-empty plate, the small smile on Lila's face. "She ate," he said quietly, as if confirming a miracle. "She did," Sophie replied, carefully extracting her hand from Lila's grip and standing. "I should get back to work." "No," Adrian said sharply. Then, more controlled, "Stay. Please." It wasn't a request. Sophie sank back into the booth, acutely aware of every pair of eyes now watching their corner. Adrian remained standing, his presence a wall of controlled intensity. "Lila," he said gently, "why don't you finish your dinner? I need to speak with Sophie for a moment." "Don't go far," Lila said, clutching Sophie's sleeve. "Promise." "I promise," Sophie whispered, though her instinct screamed at her to run. Adrian gestured toward the stairs leading to his office, and Sophie knew she had no choice but to follow. As she stood, Maria caught her eye from across the room, her expression a mixture of awe and terror. Sophie climbed the stairs on unsteady legs, feeling the weight of Adrian Moretti's attention on her back like the barrel of a loaded gun. Whatever happened next, she knew one thing with absolute certainty: her quiet life had just ended. The office was nothing like Sophie expected. She'd imagined dark leather, cigar smoke, maybe a gun casually displayed on the desk, all the clichés of Mafia movies. Instead, she found floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the restaurant below, modern furniture in shades of gray, and photographs. So many photographs. Lila at the beach. Lila blowing out birthday candles. Lila asleep with a stuffed rabbit clutched to her chest. And in every frame's background, barely visible but always present, a woman with kind eyes and Lila's same dark curls. "Sit," Adrian said, closing the door behind them. Sophie perched on the edge of a chair, her hands folded in her lap to hide their shaking. Through the window, she could see Lila still eating, watched over by Vincent, who looked ready to faint from stress. Adrian didn't sit. He stood by the window, hands in his pockets, studying his daughter with an expression Sophie couldn't read. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than before, tired in a way that went bone deep. 8 months, he said. 8 months of doctors, child psychologists, specialists from Boston and Philadelphia. Everyone with theories. Trauma, depression, selective mutism. They threw around diagnoses like confetti and accomplished nothing. He turned to face Sophie, and the intensity in his gray eyes made her want to shrink into the chair. "Then you," A waitress who's been here 2 weeks. Get her to eat in 5 minutes. So I'll ask you again, with more clarity this time. Who the hell are you? Nobody, Sophie said quickly. I'm good with kids. I used to volunteer at a youth center in Chicago before I moved here. Sometimes children just need someone who doesn't treat them like they're broken. Chicago, Adrian's eyes narrowed. Why did you leave? The question felt like a trap, but Sophie forced herself to meet his gaze. Personal reasons. Family stuff. I needed a fresh start. Family stuff, he repeated, tasting the vagueness of her answer. And you chose New York? Expensive city, for fresh starts. How did you end up at my restaurant specifically? I applied to 20 places. You were the first to call back. It was the truth, but even to her own ears, it sounded rehearsed. Adrian moved to his desk, pulled open a drawer, and extracted a folder. He flipped it open, scanning contents Sophie couldn't see. Sophie Martinez. 28 years old. No criminal record. References from 3 different restaurants in Chicago, all glowing. Lived at the same address for 6 years before suddenly relocating 3 months ago, he looked up. Father was a cop. Died in the line of duty when you were 17-inch. Sophie's blood turned to ice. How did you? I know everything about everyone who works for me, Adrian interrupted. It's not personal. It's survival. He closed the folder, but his expression had shifted. Less suspicious, more calculating. A cop's daughter. That's interesting. It was a long time ago, Sophie said, her throat tight. It doesn't define me. Death always defines us. Adrian's gaze drifted back to Lila. Whether we want it to or not. The silence stretched between them, heavy with shared grief neither wanted to acknowledge. Sophie thought about her father. The way he used to make her laugh by pretending vegetables were tiny aliens invading her plate. The same silly game she'd just played with Lila. My wife died in a car accident, Adrian said suddenly. March 15th. Lila was in the car too. She walked away without a scratch, but she hasn't been the same since. Won't talk about it. Won't talk much at all, actually. Until tonight. Sophie's chest tightened. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Be useful. Adrian crossed his arms, his business demeanor snapping back into place. Starting tomorrow, you're on special assignment. You'll come to my home every morning at 8. You'll have breakfast with Lila, stay through lunch, make sure she eats. You'll be compensated well, triple your current salary. Mr. Moretti, I don't think. It's not a request, Miss Martinez, his voice hardened. My daughter connected with you in a way she hasn't connected with anyone since her mother died. I don't understand it, and frankly, it makes me uneasy. But I will use whatever tools I have to help her heal. You're a tool I intend to use. The bluntness should have offended her, but Sophie understood what he wasn't saying. This was desperation dressed up as command. What if I say no? Adrian's smile was cold. You won't. Because despite whatever brought you running from Chicago, despite whatever secrets you're carrying, you care about my daughter. I saw it in your face downstairs. You won't walk away from a child who needs you. He was right, and they both knew it.
Fine, Sophie said.
But I have conditions. Lila isn't a project. She's a little girl who lost her mother. If I'm going to help her, you let me do it my way. No doctors observing us.
No cameras.
No pressure. She gets to be a kid, not a patient. For the first time since entering the office, Adrian's expression softened, just barely, like ice cracking under pressure.
Deal.
As Sophie stood to leave, Adrian's voice stopped her at the door. Miss Martinez? That thing you did downstairs, making her smile, don't stop doing that. Whatever it costs, whatever you need, just don't stop. Sophie nodded, not trusting her voice. As she descended the stairs, she caught Maria's worried look and Vincent's pale face. The other staff watched her like she'd just signed a contract with the devil. Maybe she had. But when Lila spotted her and lit up with the first genuine smile Sophie had seen, she knew she couldn't walk away. Even if every instinct told her she should. The Moretti estate sat behind iron gates that looked more suited to a fortress than a home. Sophie pressed the intercom button at exactly 7:55 a.m., her stomach churning with anxiety she couldn't quite name. Name, crackled a voice through the speaker. Sophie Martinez. Mr. Moretti is expecting me. The gates swung open with a mechanical groan, revealing a winding driveway lined with perfectly manicured hedges. Sophie's decade-old Honda looked pathetically out of place as she drove past marble fountains and groomed lawns that probably cost more to maintain than her yearly salary. The mansion itself was stunning, all white columns and tall windows that reflected the morning sun. But there was something hollow about its beauty, like a wedding cake left out too long. Pretty on the outside, stale within. 2 security guards flanked the front entrance. They didn't smile as Sophie approached, just watched her with a flat, assessing eyes of men paid to trust no one. Arms out, the taller one said. Sophie complied, letting him wave a metal detector wand over her body while the other guard examined her purse with methodical precision. They confiscated her phone, security protocol, and handed her a visitor badge that felt more like a tracking device. Straight through the main hall. Someone will meet you, the first guard said, returning her emptied purse. The front door opened into a foyer that took Sophie's breath away. A crystal chandelier the size of her entire apartment hung from a ceiling painted with classical frescoes. The floor was polished marble that reflected her nervous face back at her. A grand staircase swept upward, splitting into 2 directions on a landing dominated by a massive oil painting. Sophie's feet carried her closer, without conscious thought. The woman in the portrait was beautiful, not in the artificial way of magazine covers, but in the warm, lived-in way that comes from joy and laughter. She wore a simple blue dress, her dark curls loose around her shoulders, and she smiled like she held the world's best secret. One hand rested on her pregnant belly. That's my mommy. Sophie spun to find Lila standing at the base of the stairs, still in her pajamas, pink with little rabbits printed all over. Her feet were bare, her hair uncombed, but her eyes were bright with something Sophie hadn't seen last night. Hope. She's very beautiful, Sophie said softly. Daddy says I look like her. Lila descended the last few steps and slipped her small hand into Sophie's. The gesture was so natural, so trusting, it made Sophie's throat tight. But I don't remember her face anymore. Just the painting. The weight of that admission, the casual way Lila accepted this terrible loss, hit Sophie like a physical blow. 8 months. The girl's mother had been gone only 8 months, and already her living memory was fading into art. Sophie's here. Lila called out, suddenly animated. She tugged Sophie forward, through hallways lined with more paintings, more photographs, more evidence of wealth that couldn't buy back what mattered most. They passed a formal dining room set for 20, but clearly unused, dust motes dancing in the sunlight. A library with leather-bound books arranged by color rather than content, looking more decorative than read. Everything was immaculate and empty, like a museum after closing time. Where is everyone? Sophie asked. Daddy's on a phone call. He's always on phone calls. Lila led her through a set of French doors into a solarium that finally felt like it belonged to a child. Here, the perfection cracked. Crayons scattered across a small table. A half-finished puzzle on the floor. Picture books stacked haphazardly on a window seat. A stuffed rabbit, the same one from the photograph upstairs, sat propped against cushions like it was waiting for someone. This is where I have breakfast, Lila announced, gesturing to the table. But I usually eat alone. Mrs. Chun brings food, but she doesn't stay. She says she has too much work. As if summoned, an older woman in a crisp uniform appeared carrying a tray. She set it down without a word, French toast, fresh berries, orange juice, then disappeared just as quickly. The efficiency was impressive and deeply sad. Does Mrs. Chun talk to you? Sophie asked, pulling out a chair. Lila shook her head, climbing into her own seat. Nobody talks much anymore. Not since Mommy left. Not died. As if her mother had simply walked out the door one day and forgotten to come back. Sophie cut the French toast into smaller pieces, watching Lila watch her. Well, I talk a lot. Sometimes too much. My dad used to say I could talk to a brick wall and make it laugh. Did your daddy leave too? The question was innocent, but it stabbed deep. Yes, sweetie. A long time ago. Do you miss him? Every single day. Lila considered this, then picked up her fork. Then we match. We both have daddies who aren't here, and mommies we miss, she paused, tilting her head. Except your daddy is here. He's just always busy. Right, Sophie said quickly, realizing her mistake. I meant. It's okay, Lila took a bite of French toast, chewing thoughtfully. Sometimes I pretend mommy just went on a trip. It's easier than the truth. Through the solarium windows, Sophie could see the gardens, elaborate and lifeless, maintained by invisible hands. A swing set stood in the distance, its chains hanging motionless. No child's laughter had disturbed this place in months. Sophie. Lila's voice was small. Will you stay all day? Please. Sophie looked at this little girl who'd somehow attached herself with the desperate grip of someone drowning and felt that familiar ache in her chest, the one that had driven her from Chicago, from her father's grave, from everything she'd known. I'll stay as long as you need me, Sophie promised. From somewhere deep in the mansion, a door slammed. Footsteps echoed through empty halls. And Sophie couldn't shake the feeling that she just walked into a beautiful trap. The gardens were less beautiful up close, perfect from a distance, but when Sophie really looked, she could see the cracks, overgrown patches where weeds pushed through expensive landscaping, roses that bloomed without anyone there to appreciate them. Lila had insisted on eating lunch outside, and Sophie had agreed, grateful to escape the oppressive silence of the mansion. They sat at a wrought iron table under a pergola wrapped in wisteria, picking at sandwiches Mrs. Chun had delivered with her usual wordless efficiency. Do you like it here? Lila asked suddenly, dropping her crust onto the plate. Sophie chose her words carefully. It's very grand. That's not what I asked. Lila's eyes, too old for her face, studied Sophie with unsettling perception. Daddy's friends say our house is beautiful, but they never smile when they say it. You didn't smile either. I think, Sophie said slowly, that houses are only as happy as the people inside them. Lila nodded like this confirmed something she'd already suspected. She picked up her stuffed rabbit, Mr. Hop, she'd called him, and hugged him tight. Have you been here before? The question came out of nowhere, stopping Sophie's heart mid-beat.
What? No, es Waitress.
Today's my first time. Oh, Lila tilted her head, confusion flickering across her features. That's weird, because you feel like home. The words were so simple, so innocent, but they hit Sophie like a freight train. She opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. How could she explain that she felt it too? That strange recognition, like meeting someone you'd known in a dream. Maybe I just have one of those faces, Sophie finally managed, forcing lightness into her voice. Lila didn't look convinced, but she let it drop, returning her attention to Mr. Hop and the elaborate story she was telling about his adventures in the garden. Sophie tried to focus on the child's chatter, but her skin prickled with awareness. She glanced toward the mansion and caught movement in one of the second-floor windows, a shadow pulling back from the glass too quickly.
Someone was watching them.
Not Adrian. He'd left hours ago in a black SUV surrounded by men in suits, barely pausing to kiss Lila's forehead and remind Sophie that Mrs. Chun had her phone number, in case of emergencies. The way he'd said it made clear that using it would be considered failure. No, this was someone else. Someone who didn't want to be seen. Lila, Sophie said casually, does anyone else live here besides you and your dad? Mrs. Chun.
And the guards.
And Marco. Lila wrinkled her nose. Daddy's friend. But he's not nice like Daddy's other friends. He watches people weird. A chill ran down Sophie's spine. What do you mean weird? Like he's trying to see inside them. To find out if they're lying, Lila looked up at Sophie, suddenly serious. He's been watching you all morning. From the window. So the child had noticed too. Sophie forced her expression to remain neutral even as her heart raced. Maybe he's just making sure you're safe. Maybe, but Lila didn't sound convinced. They spent the afternoon in the garden, Sophie pushing Lila on the unused swing set until the girls' laughter finally sounded genuine. It was the first time Sophie had heard her really laugh, not the polite smile from the restaurant, but actual joy bubbling up from somewhere deep. For a moment, watching Lila's dark curls fly in the wind, Sophie forgot about watching shadows and dangerous men. She forgot about her own buried secrets and just let herself be present with this child who needed her. But the moment shattered when a man's voice cut through the afternoon air. "You must be the miracle worker." Sophie caught the swing, stopping Lila's momentum, and turned to find a man approaching from the mansion. He was mid-40s, built like a boxer, with a scar cutting through his left eyebrow. He wore an expensive suit but carried himself like the violence underneath was barely contained.
"I'm Sophie," she said evenly.
"And you are?"
"Marco Russo."
Mr. Moretti's associate. He stopped a few feet away, hands in his pockets, but his eyes never stopped moving, cataloging, assessing, measuring threats. "I handle security for the family." "Then you're doing a great job," Sophie said, injecting false warmth into her voice. "Very thorough." Something flickered in Marco's expression, amusement or annoyance. She couldn't tell. Just being cautious. Adrian's been through enough. Last thing he needs is someone taking advantage of his daughter's vulnerability. The accusation hung in the air between them, barely veiled. "I would never," Sophie started, but Marco raised a hand. "Everyone says that. Everyone has good intentions," he smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Until they don't. I've been with the Moretti family for 15 years. Watched Lila come into this world. So you'll forgive me for being protective."
"Marco."
Lila's voice was sharp, angry in a way Sophie hadn't heard before. "Stop being mean. Sophie's my friend." "Of course she is, princess." Marco's tone softened when addressing the child, revealing genuine affection underneath the suspicion. "I'm just making sure she knows how important you are." He shifted his attention back to Sophie, and the warmth vanished. "We ran your background check. Clean as a whistle." Which, in my experience, usually means someone's very good at hiding things. Sophie's pulse hammered, but she kept her expression calm. "Or it means I'm exactly who I say I am, someone who needed a job and got one." "Maybe." Marco pulled a business card from his pocket and held it out. "But I'm going to keep digging anyway. It's my job. And if I find something Adrian needs to know about, I'll tell him. Fair warning." Sophie took the card with steady fingers, though inside, she was screaming. "Fair enough." Marco nodded, gave Lila one more genuine smile, then headed back toward the mansion. Sophie watched him go, her mind racing. What would he find? Her father's death was public record, a hero cop killed during a gang-related incident 11 years ago. The official story. But the truth, the parts buried in sealed files and whispered conversations, that was something else entirely. "Don't worry about Marco," Lila said, reclaiming Sophie's attention. "He acts scary, but Daddy says it's because he cares too much." Sophie knelt beside the swing, meeting Lila's eyes. "He's right to protect you. But not from you," Lila insisted, taking Sophie's face between her small hands with startling intensity. "You're safe." "I know you are." Sophie wished she could believe that. As they walked back to the mansion hand in hand, Sophie felt Marco's eyes on them from somewhere above. She didn't look up, didn't acknowledge the scrutiny. But she knew, with growing certainty, that her time here was on borrowed seconds. And when the truth came out, as it always did, she wasn't sure who would survive the explosion. Sophie woke up screaming. Her sheets were soaked with sweat, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst through her ribs. For a moment, she didn't know where she was, couldn't separate the nightmare from reality.
Fire.
She'd been surrounded by fire. The smell of burning metal and gasoline filled her nose, even though her tiny studio apartment was cold and dark. Her hands shook as she reached for the lamp, flooding the room with harsh light that did nothing to chase away the images seared into her mind. A car.
Black.
Upside down. Flames licking at the windows. Screaming. Someone was screaming. A man's voice, hoarse and desperate. Save the child.
Please.
Save the child. And then crying. The high-pitched wail of an infant, barely audible over the roar of fire and the shriek of approaching sirens. Sophie pressed her palms against her eyes, trying to force the fragments back into whatever dark corner of her brain they'd escaped from. She'd had this nightmare before, variations of it anyway. Random flashes that felt like memories but couldn't be. She'd been 17 when her father died, not present at some car accident with a burning vehicle and a crying baby. But the dreams had been getting worse since she'd started working at La Vigna. More vivid, more specific, more real. She grabbed her phone from the nightstand, 3:47 a.m., and in a few hours, she'd need to be back at the Moretti mansion, smiling and stable and trustworthy. Everything Marco suspected she wasn't. Her phone screen showed 17 missed calls and twice as many texts, all from the same Chicago number. Her Uncle Ray. She'd been ignoring him for weeks, but his messages were getting more urgent. Sophie, call me back. It's important. I found something in your father's things. You need to see this. Why did you really leave Chicago? What are you running from? She deleted the messages without reading the rest and turned off her phone.
Sleep was impossible now.
Sophie wrapped herself in her father's old police jacket, the one thing she'd taken from his apartment after the funeral, and moved to the window. Her neighborhood was quiet at this hour, just the occasional taxi passing and the glow of a 24-hour bodega on the corner. She'd been 10 years old when the nightmares first started. Random, disconnected images that her father had dismissed as an active imagination. He'd sit with her, stroke her hair, and tell her stories until she fell back asleep. But sometimes, in those moments between waking and sleeping, she'd catch a strange look on his face, like he knew something he couldn't say. After he died, the dreams had stopped. For years, nothing. Until now. Sophie moved to the small desk shoved against her wall and pulled out the bottom drawer. Beneath old bills and takeout menus, she found what she was looking for. The box of her father's things she'd rescued before his captain cleaned out his desk. His badge. A few photos. Commendations. And a small, leather-bound notebook filled with his cramped handwriting. She tried reading it once right after his death, but the entries were cryptic. Dates, names, coded references she couldn't understand. The desperate shorthand of a man who knew he might not survive to explain. Now, with her hands still shaking from the nightmare, Sophie flipped through the pages with new eyes. Most of it was still incomprehensible, but one entry stopped her cold. March 15, 2019 Protection Detail. High-risk family. Wife pregnant. He says they're coming for him. Wants to disappear. Can't let him. Not yet. Need more evidence. God forgive me if something happens. March 15th. The same date Adrian said his wife died. Sophie's blood turned to ice. She flipped forward, searching for more entries, but the next pages were torn out, jagged edges, showing where someone had ripped them free. The final entry was dated March 18th, 2019. I was wrong. So wrong. The baby survived. Thank God the baby survived. But I can't. The sentence ended abruptly, unfinished. 3 days later, her father was dead. Shot during what was officially ruled a gang-related ambush during a routine patrol. But he hadn't been on patrol. He'd been on leave, supposedly visiting family in Wisconsin. Sophie had been 17 and drowning in grief, too shattered to question the inconsistencies. Now, sitting in the dark with pieces of a puzzle she didn't want to solve, everything felt different. The baby survived. Lila was 8 months old when her mother died, which meant she'd been in the car during the accident. The accident on March 15th, 2019. The same night Sophie's father had been working protection detail. Her apartment suddenly felt too small, the walls closing in. Sophie shoved the notebook back in the drawer and paced, trying to think through the panic clawing at her throat. This was coincidence. Had to be. Thousands of people died in New York every year. Car accidents happened all the time. And protection detail. Her father had done dozens of them. But even as she tried to rationalize, she knew she was lying to herself. The dreams weren't random. The way Lila had said, "You feel like home," wasn't chance. And the burning car in her nightmares, the one she couldn't possibly remember because she hadn't been there, matched too perfectly with the death of Lila's mother. Sophie returned to the window, watching dawn begin to break over the city. In a few hours, she'd go back to that mansion. She'd smile and play and feed Lila breakfast like nothing was wrong. But everything was wrong. Her father had been connected to the Morettas, had been there the night Lila's mother died. And then he died too, 3 days later, with torn-out pages and unfinished sentences as his only legacy. Whatever Adrian was hiding about his wife's death, whatever secrets Marco was digging for, Sophie was somehow tangled in all of it. And the man signing her paychecks might be the same man responsible for making her an orphan. Her phone buzzed, a new message from Uncle Ray that must have come through before she powered down. "Your father didn't die in a gang shooting. He died protecting someone. And I think you already know who." Sophie's hands trembled as she read it again. And again. Outside, the city woke up, indifferent to the fact that her entire world had just shifted on its axis. She had to go back to that mansion. Had to look Adrian in the eye and pretend she didn't suspect anything. Had to keep playing this game until she understood the rules. Even if it killed her. Sophie made it through the day on autopilot. Breakfast with Lila. Lunch in the garden. An afternoon of coloring books and pretend tea parties. She smiled in all the right places, laughed when expected, and buried the screaming questions beneath layers of forced normalcy. But her hands shook every time she caught a glimpse of Adrian's late wife's portrait. By evening, when Adrian still hadn't returned home, and Mrs. Chun had long since disappeared into whatever part of the mansion she inhabited, Sophie found herself alone with Lila in the girls' bedroom. The room was a stark contrast to the rest of the house, actually lived in, with toys scattered across plush carpets and drawings taped to the walls. A canopy bed dominated the space, covered in stuffed animals that Lila had introduced one by one, complete with names and elaborate backstories. "Will you stay until I fall asleep?" Lila asked, already changed into pajamas covered in stars. "Of course," Sophie said, tucking the blankets around her. But an hour later, Lila was still wide awake, staring at the ceiling with that too-old sadness in her eyes. "Can't sleep?" Sophie asked gently. "I keep thinking about Mommy." Lila's voice was small in the dark room. "Sometimes I try really hard to remember her voice, but I can't. It's gone." Sophie's chest tightened. She knew that particular grief intimately, the way memory faded, leaving only the ache of absence. "What helps you sleep at home?" Sophie asked. "Nothing." "Not anymore." Lila rolled over to face her. "Mommy used to sing to me, but I don't remember the songs." Sophie scanned the room, looking for something, anything to comfort this child. Her gaze landed on a shelf near the window, cluttered with books and trinkets. Among them, something caught the lamplight, a small, ornate music box with a ballerina frozen mid-spin on top. "What about that?" Sophie pointed. Lila followed her gaze and shook her head. "That's been broken forever. It doesn't play anymore." But Sophie was already moving toward it, drawn by an instinct she couldn't name. She picked up the music box. It was heavier than expected, made of dark wood with silver inlays. Her fingers found the winding key on the bottom, and before she could second-guess the impulse, she turned it.
Click, click, click.
The mechanism caught, and suddenly the room filled with a delicate melody. Soft and haunting, the kind of lullaby that felt older than memory. The ballerina began to turn, her tiny painted face serene. Sophie froze. She knew this song. Not the way you know something you've heard on the radio or at a concert. She knew it the way you know your own heartbeat, intimate and undeniable. The melody wrapped around her like a familiar embrace, and suddenly she was humming along, the notes coming automatically from somewhere deep inside. Sophie. Lila's voice was awed, almost frightened. Huh. How do you know that song? Sophie's humming stopped abruptly. She stared at the music box in her hands, her mind racing. I don't know. I've never heard it before. Yes, you have, Lila whispered, sitting up in bed. Her eyes were huge in the dim light. That's Daddy's song. Mommy used to play it every night before bed. She said it was special, that Daddy's mama gave it to her. The room spun. Sophie carefully set the music box down on the nightstand, but the melody continued, each note driving splinters into her brain. That's impossible, Sophie said, more to herself than to Lila. I could know this song. I've never. Footsteps in the hallway. The bedroom door flew open, and Adrian stood frozen in the doorway. His suit jacket was gone, his tie loosened, and his face had gone completely white. He stared at the music box like he was seeing a ghost. Where did you get that? His voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of an earthquake. It was on Lila's shelf, Sophie said quickly. I just thought. That music box was destroyed. Adrian moved into the room, his movements careful, controlled, like approaching a bomb. It was in the car the night Maria died. They said nothing survived the fire. The fire? Sophie's nightmare came rushing back, flames, screaming, a baby crying. But it's here, Lila said, confused by her father's reaction. It's been here forever, Daddy. On my shelf. Adrian reached the nightstand and picked up the music box with shaking hands. The melody was winding down now, the ballerina's spins slowing. He turned it over, examining every detail, and Sophie saw the moment he confirmed what he already knew. This is it, he breathed. The engraving. See? He pointed to tiny script carved into the bottom. For Maria, who dances in my dreams. The song stopped. The ballerina froze mid-turn. Adrian's gray eyes lifted to Sophie's face, and what she saw there terrified her. Suspicion, confusion, and something darker. Something dangerous. How did you know the song? He asked, his voice deadly calm. My mother brought that music box from Italy 50 years ago. It's one of a kind. The melody was composed by my grandfather. There's no recording, no other copy. So tell me, Sophie, how did you know the song? I don't, Sophie's voice failed. Because she had known it. Had hummed along perfectly, every note in its right place. Daddy, you're scaring her, Lila said, climbing out of bed to stand between them. But Adrian wasn't looking at his daughter anymore. He was staring at Sophie like she'd just revealed herself to be something other than human. I need the truth, he said quietly. Right now.
Who sent you?
What are you really doing here? Nobody sent me, Sophie insisted, backing toward the door. I swear I don't understand any of this. Then how do you explain the music box? It was destroyed 8 months ago, and now it's suddenly here? And you, he stopped, jaw clenched. You knew the song. My wife's song. The one she played every night. Sophie's back hit the wall. She had no explanation. No rational way to make sense of what had just happened. The music box should have been destroyed. She shouldn't have known the melody. None of this was possible. Unless her nightmares weren't dreams at all. Mr. Moretti, she said carefully, I think we need to talk. About your wife's accident. About what really happened that night. What do you know about that night? Adrian's hand moved to his waist. To where, Sophie realized with cold terror, he probably carried a gun. I know my father was there, Sophie whispered. I know he died 3 days later. And I know there's a connection between us that neither of us understands yet. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications neither wanted to face. Lila looked between them, her small face confused and frightened. Sophie? Daddy? What's happening? But neither adult could answer. Because the truth was starting to emerge from its grave, and it was hungry. Adrian's study was nothing like his office at the restaurant. This was his real space: dark wood panels, leather chairs worn from use, and a massive desk covered in papers and photographs. The walls were lined with books that actually looked red, their spines creased and broken in. He'd sent Lila back to bed with Mrs. Chen, then silently gestured for Sophie to follow him downstairs. The walk through the mansion had felt like a death march. Now they faced each other across his desk, the music box sitting between them like evidence at a trial.
Talk, Adrian said.
His voice was cold, empty of the warmth she'd occasionally glimpsed when he spoke to Lila. This was the man Marco worked for, the man people feared. Sophie's mouth was dry. My father was Detective James Martinez, Chicago PD, but he worked special assignments all over. He died 11 years ago, officially in a gang-related shooting. But I found his notebook. He was working protection detail on March 15, 2019, the same night your wife died. Adrian's expression didn't change, but his fingers tightened on the armrest of his chair. Continue. I don't remember that night. I was 17. My father told me he was visiting family in Wisconsin. But I've been having nightmares, dreams about fire and a car accident and a baby crying. And tonight, when I heard that music, Sophie's voice cracked. I knew it, Mr. Moretti. Not like I'd heard it before. I knew it like it was part of me. That's impossible. I know. Sophie stood abruptly, pacing the length of the study. I know it's impossible, but it's true. And the only explanation I can think of is that I was there somehow. That night. At the accident. Adrian was quiet for a long moment, studying her with those storm cloud eyes. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw. Tell me what you see. In your dreams. Sophie closed her eyes, letting the nightmare surface. A black car. Overturned. Fire everywhere. Someone screaming, a man. He sang, save the child, and then sirens and a baby crying, and she stopped, gasping. And someone's holding me back. Strong hands on my shoulders. A voice sang, don't look, Sophie. Don't look. The leather chair creaked as Adrian stood. He moved to a filing cabinet in the corner, unlocked it, and pulled out a folder. He dropped it on the desk in front of Sophie. This is the official report from that night. Read it. Sophie opened the folder with trembling hands. Police report, witness statements, photographs she couldn't bring herself to look at too closely. Her eyes scanned the text, looking for her father's name.
There.
Listed as first responder. Detective James Martinez arrived on scene at 11:47 p.m. He was there, she whispered. He was more than there. Adrian pulled out a second file. This one thinner. This is what I pieced together afterward, from people who owed me favors. Your father wasn't first responder. He was already at the scene because he'd been following my wife's car. He'd warned me 2 days earlier that someone was planning to kill me. I didn't listen. Told him I could handle my own security. Adrian's voice broke, just slightly. Maria was driving my car that night. I was supposed to be in it. Your father realized what was happening. The bomb was on a timer. He got Lila out of her car's seat 30 seconds before the explosion. But Maria was trapped.
The doors were jammed.
He tried. God, he tried so hard to get her out. Sophie's legs gave out. She sank back into the chair, the file falling from her hands. He died 3 days later. Adrian continued, his voice flat now, emotionless. Shot in an alley 15 miles from the accident site. They made it look like a robbery. But I knew. The same people who killed Maria made sure the one witness who could identify them was silenced. Why didn't you tell the police? Why didn't you? Because going to war would have killed more people I loved. Adrian's fists clenched. Because Lila was 8 months old and I'd just lost my wife. Because your father made me promise, in the hospital before he went back on duty, that I'd protect his daughter. That I'd keep her away from all of this. Sophie's head snapped up. His daughter? You knew about me? I knew James Martinez had a 17-year-old daughter in Chicago. I knew he died trying to save my family. I've been sending money to your uncle every month for 11 years through an anonymous trust. Adrian leaned against his desk, suddenly looking exhausted. I owed your father everything. And now his daughter shows up at my restaurant, connects with my child in a way no one else can, and somehow knows a melody that should be impossible for her to know. I don't understand any of this, Sophie said, her voice breaking. If I was there that night, why don't I remember? Why would my father bring me to something so dangerous? I don't know. Adrian moved to the window, staring out at the dark gardens. But I'm going to find out. Marco has been digging into your background since yesterday. Maybe he's found something. Marco, Sophie stood on shaky legs. He knows all of this. Marco knows everything. He was driving the decoy car that night, the one that should have been bombed. He's spent 11 years trying to find who was responsible. And now you show up, connected to everything in ways that don't make sense. He thinks I'm part of it, Sophie finished. He thinks I'm here to hurt you. Adrian turned to face her, and for the first time, she saw something other than anger in his eyes. Grief. Confusion. And maybe, just maybe, a desperate hope that she wasn't the enemy. Are you? He asked simply. No, Sophie met his gaze without flinching. I came to New York to escape my past, not to dig it up. I took the job at your restaurant because I needed work. I connected with Lila because her voice caught. Because I know what it's like to lose a parent, to have that hole inside that never quite heals. They stood in silence, two people bound by tragedy and mystery neither fully understood. The music box, Sophie said finally. How did it survive if it was in the car? I don't know. I've been asking myself that same question for the last hour. Adrian picked it up, turning it over in his hands. Everything in that car was destroyed. The investigators said the heat was intense enough to melt metal. This should be ash. Unless someone took it out before the fire. Your father, Adrian's eyes widened. He got Lila out. Maybe he grabbed the music box too. Maybe he gave it to someone to return. To who? And why would it end up on Lila's shelf years later? Before Adrian could answer, the study door burst open. Marco stood in the doorway, his face grim, holding a tablet. We need to talk, Marco said, his eyes locked on Sophie.
Now.
I found something you both need to see. The way he said it made Sophie's blood run cold. Whatever truth Marco had uncovered, she knew with terrible certainty that nothing would ever be the same again. Marco set the tablet on Adrian's desk with the careful precision of someone handling a live grenade. His eyes never left Sophie's face. Detective James Martinez, Marco began, pulling up a file. Decorated officer. 15 years with Chicago PD, specialized in organized crime protection details. Dies March 18, 2019, officially ruled a random robbery. He paused. Except 3 weeks ago, his old captain filed paperwork to reopen the case. Sophie's breath caught. What? Captain Raymond Martinez, your uncle, I'm guessing, submitted new evidence to the review board. Ballistics report that was conveniently lost 11 years ago. Turns out the bullets that killed your father matched a weapon used in 4 other executions. All connected to the Calabrese family. Adrian's face hardened. The Calabrese crew. They were trying to move in on my territory back then. Still are, Marco muttered. But here's where it gets interesting. He swiped to another document. Your uncle didn't just submit evidence. He also filed a request to access sealed witness protection records. Specifically, records from March 2019. Sophie's head spun. Witness protection? My father wasn't. Not your father. Marco's expression was unreadable. You. The word hung in the air like smoke. That's insane, Sophie whispered. I've never been in witness protection. I would remember. Not if you were 17 and traumatized and the memories were chemically suppressed. Marco pulled up medical records that made Sophie's stomach drop. Chicago General Hospital. March 16, 2019. Sophie Martinez, admitted for acute psychological trauma. Administered sedatives and underwent emergency psychiatric evaluation. Discharged 3 days later into the care of Raymond Martinez with a prescription for anti-anxiety medication and orders for ongoing therapy. Sophie gripped the edge of the desk. Fragments were surfacing now, hazy memories of hospital rooms and her uncle's worried face. She'd thought she was hospitalized after her father's death, but the timeline was wrong. Her father had died on the 18th. She'd been admitted on the 16th. 2 days before he was killed. "I don't understand," she said weakly. "Neither do I." Yet Marco's jaw tightened. "But your uncle does. He's been trying to call you for weeks, and you've been ignoring him. So he did something desperate." Marco pulled up an email, dated this morning. Sophie read it with growing horror. "Detective Harris, Chicago PD. I'm contacting you because I have information about the Martinez-Moretti incident from March 2019. My niece Sophie was present at the scene. She witnessed the bombing. James brought her because he suspected there would be trouble and wanted her somewhere he could protect her. Didn't trust leaving her alone that night. The trauma caused her to block the memories. But she's in New York now, working for Adrian Moretti, and I believe being near the family is triggering recall. She's in danger. The people who killed James will come for her if they realize she can identify them. I need your help getting her somewhere safe before it's too late. Captain Raymond Martinez." The email had been sent to an NYPD detective at 6 a.m. that morning. "He's coming for you," Marco said quietly. "Your uncle. He reached out to a contact here in the city. Detective Harris is old school, loyal. He's probably already on his way to verify your location." Sophie's mind reeled. "My father brought me that night? Why would he?" "Because he was scared." Adrian's voice was rough. "He told me the Calabrese family had threatened his daughter. Said if he didn't back off the protection detail, they'd hurt you. He wanted you close, where he could see you, where he thought you'd be safe." The pieces were clicking together, forming a picture Sophie didn't want to see. "So, I was there. I saw the bombing. Saw your wife die. And then your father got you to the hospital, told them you'd witnessed a traumatic accident, and had them sedate you to suppress the immediate memories." Marco's expression softened slightly. "It's a technique sometimes used in witness protection. Gives victims time to process before the full trauma hits. Except in your case, the suppression lasted 11 years. Until now," Sophie whispered. "Until I started being around Lila. Around reminders." "The brain is strange," Marco said. "Trauma hides until it feels safe to surface. Maybe being with Lila, seeing her grief, created enough emotional safety for your own memories to start breaking through." A knock at the study door interrupted them. Mrs. Chin stood in the doorway, looking uncomfortable. "Mr. Moretti, there's a Detective Harris at the gate. He says it's urgent police business regarding Miss Martinez." The three of them exchanged looks. "He's here," Marco said unnecessarily. Sophie stood on shaking legs. "I need to talk to him. If my uncle sent him, if he has information." "It could be a trap," Marco warned. "The Calabrese family has cops on their payroll. If they know you're starting to remember." "Then I'm already dead," Sophie finished. "But if there's a chance this detective actually knows something that can help us understand what happened that night, we have to take it." Adrian studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Bring him to the study. But Marco, you and the team stay close." 5 minutes later, Detective Harris entered. He was in his 50s, with gray hair and the weathered face of someone who'd seen too much. His eyes went immediately to Sophie, and something in his expression made her chest tighten. "Sophie Martinez," he said quietly. "I worked with your father for 8 years. He was one of the best men I ever knew. Did my uncle really send you?"
Sophie asked.
Harris nodded, pulling an envelope from his jacket. "He did. He asked me to give you this. Said you'd need to see it before the memories fully return." He paused, glancing at Adrian and Marco. "He also asked me to get you somewhere safe. Said the girl who witnessed Maria Moretti's murder isn't safe anywhere near the Moretti family." "The girl who witnessed," Sophie's voice trailed off. "You mean me?" "No." Harris's expression was grim. He handed her the envelope. "I mean the other girl, who was there that night. The one no one knows about except your father, your uncle, and now me. Sophie opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a photograph, grainy, clearly taken from a distance with a telephoto lens. It showed the accident scene, emergency vehicles, flames, and in the foreground, a man, her father, kneeling next to two figures. One was a baby in a car seat, Lila. The other was a teenage girl with dark hair, face streaked with tears, staring at the burning car. Sophie recognized herself immediately. But that wasn't what made her knees buckle. Behind her father, barely visible in the smoke, was another figure, a woman, stumbling away from the wreckage, her clothes burned, her face obscured. Harris's voice was gentle but firm. Your father lied in his report. Maria Moretti didn't die in that car. Someone else did. And your father spent the last 3 days of his life trying to figure out where Maria went and who wanted everyone to think she was dead. The study erupted in chaos. Adrian grabbed the photograph, his face draining of color. Marco was already on his phone, barking orders. And Sophie stood frozen, her entire understanding of the past 11 years crumbling to dust. If Maria Moretti didn't die that night, then where had she been for 8 months? And why had she disappeared? The photograph slipped from Adrian's fingers, falling to the desk like a death sentence. That's impossible, his voice was barely a whisper. I identified her body. I buried my wife. You buried someone, Harris corrected. But the dental records were inconclusive due to fire damage. The autopsy was rushed. And the funeral home your family used had a history of, let's call them irregularities, he paused. Your wife's family wanted a closed casket.
They said it was out of respect.
But what if someone paid them to make sure no one looked too closely? Marco's face had gone stone cold. Who knew about this photograph? Only Captain Martinez and James. It was taken by a traffic camera at the intersection. James pulled it before anyone else could access the footage. He was trying to protect Maria, thought if people knew she survived, they'd come after her to finish the job. Then where is she? Adrian's voice cracked. If Maria survived, where has she been for 11 years? Why didn't she come back? Why leave Lila? He couldn't finish. Sophie's mind was racing, but one thought cut through the chaos with crystal clarity. Someone wanted everyone to think she was dead, including you. Which means whoever set that bomb had a reason to make Maria disappear. The Calabrese family, Marco growled. They were trying to take over your operations. Killing Maria would have destabilized everything. But she didn't die, Harris interjected. And James figured out she was in hiding. He found something, a lead, a witness, I don't know. But 3 days after the bombing, he went to meet someone who claimed to know where Maria was. That's when they killed him. The study door burst open. One of the guards rushed in, his face pale. Sir, we have a situation. Multiple vehicles approaching fast from both access roads. They're not showing on our approved list. Marco was already moving. How many? At least 6.
Armed.
They've disabled the front gate controls. Gunfire erupted outside. The sharp crack of automatic weapons shattered the night's silence. Get down. Marco shoved Sophie behind the desk as bullets punched through the study windows. Glass exploded inward, raining down like deadly snow. Adrian was shouting into his phone, calling for backup for his men scattered throughout the estate. Harris had his service weapon drawn, moving toward the doorway with practiced efficiency. Lila. Adrian's voice rose above the chaos. She's upstairs with Mrs. Chen. I'll get her. Sophie was moving before anyone could stop her, adrenaline overriding terror. Sophie, wait. Adrian reached for her, but she was already through the door, running toward the grand staircase. The mansion had become a war zone. More gunfire from the front entrance.
Shouting.
The sound of something heavy, a vehicle, maybe, crashing through the gates. Sophie's heart hammered as she took the stairs 2 at a time, her father's voice echoing in her memory. When things go bad, you move toward the people you love, not away from them. Lila's bedroom was at the end of the East Hall. Sophie burst through the door to find Mrs. Chen barricading it with a dresser, Lila clutched against her chest. The little girl was crying, terrified by the sounds of violence below. Sophie. Lila reached for her, and Sophie grabbed her, pulling her close. "We have to get out of here," Sophie said. "Is there another way down?" Mrs. Chen nodded, her hands shaking. "Service stairs. Behind the linen closet. They lead to the kitchen." More gunfire, closer now. Someone was inside the house. Sophie followed Mrs. Chen through the hidden door, descending narrow stairs in near darkness. Lila clung to her neck, whimpering but trying to stay quiet. They reached the kitchen just as the main floor erupted in sustained gunfire. "The panic room," Mrs. Chen gasped. Behind the pantry, Mr. Moretti had it installed. The kitchen door exploded inward. A man in tactical gear swept in, weapon raised. Sophie didn't think, just grabbed a cast-iron skillet from the counter and swung with all her strength. It connected with his temple with a sickening crack. He went down hard. "Go!" Sophie pushed Mrs. Chen and Lila toward the pantry. "Lock yourselves in. Don't open it for anyone but Adrian or Marco." "What about you?" Mrs. Chen's eyes were wide with fear. "I'm calling 911 and finding Adrian." Sophie grabbed the fallen man's radio. Voices crackled through, coordinated attack plans, room clearances, someone saying, "Find the girl and the witness." The witness. They meant Sophie. She shoved Mrs. Chen into the panic room and slammed the hidden door shut, hearing the locks engage. Lila's muffled crying cut through her heart, but she had to trust the room would protect them. Sophie moved through the mansion like a ghost, using service corridors her father had probably taught her about in a life she couldn't remember. The gunfire was concentrated near the study now. She could hear Marco shouting orders, Adrian's voice cutting through the chaos. She emerged from a side hallway just in time to see Detective Harris take a bullet to the shoulder, spinning him around. He went down near the study entrance, blood spreading across his shirt. And standing over him, gun raised, was a face Sophie recognized from Marco's files. Vincent Calabrese, the son of the old boss. Young, ambitious, and, according to Marco's notes, hungry to reclaim his family's lost territory. "Where is she?" Vincent demanded, pressing the gun to Harris's head. "Where's the Martinez girl?" "Right here," Sophie said, stepping into the open. Every gun in the hallway swung toward her. Marco was pinned behind an overturned table, Adrian nowhere in sight. 3 of Vincent's men blocked the exits. Vincent smiled. It was the smile of a predator finally cornering its prey. Sophie Martinez. The girl who saw everything. The one loose end my father couldn't find for 11 years. "I don't remember anything," Sophie lied. "Whatever you think I saw doesn't matter anymore." Vincent raised his gun. "You're a symbol now. The cop's daughter working for the Morettis. My family can't look weak. Can't let betrayal go unpunished. So you die tonight, and Adrian watches, and everyone remembers what happens when you cross the Calabrese family." Sophie's mind raced. She had no weapon, no cover, no way out. But she had one thing Vincent didn't expect. "Your father killed the wrong woman," she said clearly. "Maria Moretti didn't die in that car. And if you kill me, you'll never find out where she's been hiding." Vincent's finger hesitated on the trigger. "You're lying. There's a photograph. Detective Harris has it. Shows Maria walking away from the wreck. My father knew. That's why you killed him. But he told me where she went before he died." She was improvising now, desperately buying time. But something in Vincent's expression shifted. Doubt, maybe, or curiosity. "If Maria's alive," he said slowly, "she can testify to what happened that night. She could destroy my family's expansion plans. Where is she?" Sophie opened her mouth to spin another lie, but the words died in her throat. Because Adrian had emerged from the shadows behind Vincent's men, and in his hands was a gun pointed directly at the back of Vincent's head. "Drop it," Adrian said quietly, "or I'll paint these walls with your brain." Everything froze. A standoff with too many guns and not enough good outcomes. And then, from somewhere upstairs, a sound that made Sophie's blood turn to ice. Lila, screaming. The panic room. Someone had found the panic room. Sophie didn't calculate odds. She just ran, straight through the line of fire, toward the stairs and the child who'd somehow become more important to her than her own life. Behind her, all hell broke loose. Sophie hit the stairs as gunfire erupted behind her. She didn't look back, couldn't afford to. Lila's screams echoed through the mansion, each one driving spikes through Sophie's heart. The kitchen was chaos. The panic room door hung open, its sophisticated locks somehow bypassed. Mrs. Chun lay unconscious near the pantry, breathing but hurt. And Lila was being dragged toward the back exit by a woman Sophie had never seen before. Dark hair streaked with gray, face gaunt but somehow familiar, moving with the desperate strength of someone who had nothing left to lose. Let her go. Sophie launched herself forward, tackling the woman. They crashed into the counter, Lila tumbling free with a cry. The woman twisted with surprising skill, landing a punch that connected with Sophie's jaw. Stars exploded across her vision, but Sophie held on, grappling, fighting with pure adrenaline and fear. Stop. The woman's voice cracked. Stop, I'm not trying to hurt her. I'm her mother. The words hit Sophie like a physical blow. She loosened her grip just enough for the woman to break free, stumbling backward. In the better light of the kitchen, Sophie finally saw it. The eyes. Lila's eyes. The shape of her face beneath the damage of years in hiding. Maria? Sophie whispered. The woman, Maria Moretti, supposedly dead for 11 years, nodded, tears streaming down her face. She looked at Lila with such raw longing it was painful to witness. Baby, it's me. It's Mommy. But Lila pressed herself against Sophie's legs, terrified and confused. You're not my mommy. My mommy's dead. Sophie, make her go away. The devastation on Maria's face was absolute. Lila, please. I know you don't remember me, but... Footsteps thundered through the house. Adrian burst into the kitchen, gun raised, Marco right behind him. He froze when he saw Maria, his weapon dropping to his side. Maria, her name came out broken, disbelieving. You're alive. You're how? There's no time, Maria said urgently. Vincent's men are everywhere. We have to get out before. Before what? Adrian's voice hardened even as his eyes stayed locked on his supposedly dead wife. Before they kill us? Or before they figure out you've been alive all these years while I raised our daughter alone? Adrian, please. You let me bury a stranger. His composure shattered. You let me tell Lila her mother was dead. You let her grow up without you.
Why?
Maria's face crumpled. Because they would have killed all of you if I stayed. The bomb wasn't meant for me. It was meant for you. But Vincent's father promised if I disappeared, if everyone thought I died, he'd leave you and Lila alone. He said my death would be enough revenge for you encroaching on their territory. So you just left. Adrian's voice broke. Without telling me? Without. James helped me, Maria interrupted, looking at Sophie. Your father. He found me stumbling away from the wreck. I begged him not to tell anyone, said if Adrian knew I was alive, he'd try to find me and get himself killed. James understood. He had a daughter too. He knew what it meant to sacrifice everything for your child's safety. Sophie's chest tightened. He died trying to protect your secret. Maria nodded, fresh tears falling. Vincent's father found out James knew something. 3 days after the bombing, they tortured him trying to get him to reveal where I'd gone. He died without telling them anything. She looked at Sophie with desperate sincerity. Your father saved my life. Saved Lila's life. And it cost him everything. The gunfire had stopped. An eerie silence filled the mansion, more frightening than the chaos. Marco's radio crackled. South perimeter secure. Vincent Calabrese in custody. 4 hostiles down. 2 escaped through the east woods. Copy, Marco responded. Then to Adrian, we got Vincent but we need to move. His backup could arrive any minute. But Adrian wasn't listening. He stared at Maria like she was a ghost he couldn't decide whether to embrace or exorcise. 11 years, he whispered. 11 years, Maria. Do you have any idea what that was like? Watching our daughter refuse to speak, refuse to eat, refuse to live because she thought she'd lost you. I know, Maria sobbed. I know, and it's destroyed me every single day. But I thought if I stayed away, you'd both be safe. That Lila could have a normal life, even without me. She had no life. Adrian's composure broke completely. She stopped being a child the day you died, and now you show up. You break into my home during an attack. You terrify her. I came because Vincent found me. Maria's voice rose. He figured out I was alive. Said he was coming here tonight to finish what his father started. Kill you, kill Lila, kill anyone who could testify about the bombing. I had to warn you. Had to try to save her. Sophie felt Lila trembling against her legs and knelt down, pulling the child into her arms. Lila, look at me. You're safe. I promise. I want her to go away, Lila whispered, her face buried in Sophie's shoulder. She's not my mommy. Mommies don't leave. The words were a knife through Maria's heart. Sophie saw it, saw the woman crumble under the weight of her daughter's rejection. Maybe, Sophie said gently, we all go somewhere safe together, away from here. And then, when everyone's calm, we figure this out.
Marco Nadid.
I've got a safe house in Connecticut. Secure, off-grid. We can take Detective Harris there too. He needs medical attention. Adrian looked between his dead wife and his traumatized daughter, his expression unreadable. Finally, he nodded. We go together. All of us. But Maria? His voice was cold. When this is over, when our daughter is safe, you and I are going to have a very long conversation about the 11 years you stole from us. Maria nodded, unable to speak through her tears. They moved quickly, Marco coordinating the convoy, guards securing the vehicles, Harris being loaded carefully into an SUV despite his protests. Sophie carried Lila, who refused to let go, refused to look at the woman who claimed to be her mother. As they drove away from the burning mansion, Vincent's men had set fires before being subdued. Sophie watched the smoke rise against the night sky and thought about sacrifice. Her father had given his life protecting a woman's secret. Maria had given up her family to keep them safe. Adrian had spent 11 years raising a daughter alone, carrying grief he couldn't share. And Sophie had walked into all of it blind, drawn by forces she hadn't understood, to save a child who needed saving. In the rear-view mirror, the Moretti estate disappeared behind flames and darkness. Everything they'd known was ash now. But from ash, Sophie thought, sometimes new things could grow. If they survived long enough to plant the seeds. The safe house was a modest cabin tucked into Connecticut woods, nothing like the Moretti mansion's grandeur. Sophie found Adrian on the porch at dawn, watching mist rise from the trees. He hadn't slept. None of them had. Inside, Lila finally dozed fitfully on a couch, wrapped in blankets. Maria sat in a corner chair, just watching her daughter breathe, not daring to come closer. Detective Harris was stable, his shoulder bandaged, resting in one of the bedrooms. Marco coordinated security from the kitchen, his phone never leaving his hand. We need to talk, Sophie said quietly, joining Adrian on the porch steps. He didn't look at her. About which part? My dead wife being alive. Your father dying to protect her? You being the witness who could have prevented all of this if you'd remembered sooner? The accusation stung because part of her had been thinking the same thing. I was 17 and traumatized. I couldn't control what my brain blocked out. I know, Adrian's voice softened.
I'm sorry.
That wasn't fair. They sat in silence, watching dawn paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. Beautiful and indifferent to human suffering. My father came here once, Sophie said suddenly. To New York, I mean. About 6 months before he died. He told me it was a work conference, but he was gone for 3 days and came back. Different. Quieter. Like he was carrying something heavy. He was visiting Maria, Adrian said. making sure she was safe. Marco found the records. Your father rented a car, drove to a small town in upstate New York where Maria was hiding. They met twice. The second time, he brought her photographs of Lila. Sophie's throat tightened. He never told me. He was protecting you. If you didn't know, you couldn't be used as leverage. Adrian finally looked at her, his gray eyes exhausted. Your father understood something I'm only learning now. Sometimes love means letting go, even when it destroys you. The porch door opened. Maria stepped out, moving carefully, like she might shatter the fragile piece. She looked between them, then focused on Adrian. Can we talk? Please. Adrian stood, and for a moment, Sophie thought he might refuse. Then he nodded and walked down the porch, steps toward a path into the woods. Maria followed. Sophie watched them disappear into the trees, two people who'd loved each other once, now strangers bound by tragedy, and a daughter who didn't remember her mother's face. They're going to the old cemetery, Marco said, appearing in the doorway with coffee. He handed Sophie a mug. Half-mile down that path. It's where the original property owners were buried. Quiet place. Good for hard conversations. Sophie sipped the bitter coffee. Will he forgive her? Does it matter? Forgiveness doesn't undo 11 years. Marco leaned against the porch railing. But maybe it lets you stop carrying the weight of them. Adrian and Maria stood among weathered headstones, names worn smooth by time and weather. The morning sun filtered through oak branches, dappling everything in light and shadow. I don't know how to do this, Maria said finally. I don't know what to say that makes any of it okay. Nothing makes it okay. Adrian's voice was steady, but his hands shook. You left me, Maria. You let me think you were dead. You let Lila grow up believing her mother abandoned her. I thought I was saving you both. By breaking us? Adrian turned to face her fully. Lila stopped speaking. Did you know that? For 8 months after you died, she wouldn't say a word. The doctors said it was trauma. I thought I was losing her too. Maria's face crumpled. I'm so sorry. I was so sure that if I stayed dead, Vincent's family would leave you alone. That you could move on, find someone else, give Lila a normal life. There is no moving on from you. Adrian's composure finally shattered completely. You were my wife, the mother of my child, the only person who made me want to be better than what my family made me. And you just disappeared. Because I loved you. Maria stepped closer, desperate. Because Vincent's father showed me pictures of what they do to families who don't cooperate. Because I couldn't watch them hurt you, or Lila. So I made a choice. Maybe the wrong choice, but it was all I had. Adrian was quiet for a long moment, staring at a headstone from 1847. A wife and mother, the inscription read. Beloved and remembered. James Martinez died protecting your secret, he said quietly. He died so Lila could have her mother back someday. And then you stayed hidden anyway. For 11 years. Even after the threat was neutralized. I was terrified, Maria whispered. Terrified that if I came back, it would start everything over again. That someone would use me to hurt you. And then, time passed. Years. How do you come back from the dead after that long? How do you explain to your daughter that you chose to stay away? Adrian pulled something from his pocket, a battered photograph, edges worn from handling. He held it out to Maria. It showed Lila at maybe 3 years old, laughing in a park, ice cream smeared across her face. This is what you missed, Adrian said, his voice breaking. Her first day of school. Her learning to ride a bike. Every nightmare where she cried for a mother who wasn't there. Every birthday where she asked me why you left her. He paused, meeting Maria's eyes. But here's what I'm learning, standing here among these graves. Holding on to anger won't bring back those years. It won't heal Lila. It just makes more graves. Maria sobbed openly now. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want a chance, any chance, to know my daughter again. Adrian looked toward the cabin, barely visible through the trees. She doesn't remember you. You're a stranger to her. And trust takes time to build. Time you threw away. I know. But Sophie. Adrian's expression softened slightly. Sophie reached Lila when no one else could. And if your daughter taught me anything, it's that family isn't always about blood. It's about who shows up. Who stays. He met Maria's eyes. I'm not saying I forgive you. I'm saying I'm willing to try. For Lila. Because she deserves to know her mother, even if I'm still angry with mine. Maria nodded, tears streaming down her face. But Maria? If you ever disappear again, if you ever put her through that pain, I won't. I swear on my life, I won't. They stood in that cemetery of strangers, surrounded by people who'd loved and lost and been forgotten by everyone except the stones that marked their passing. And slowly, carefully, like touching something that might break, Maria reached for Adrian's hand. He let her take it. We go back together, he said. We tell Lila the truth. All of it. And we let her decide what happens next. But you don't push. You don't demand. You earn your way back into her life. However long it takes, Maria agreed. They walked back through the woods as the sun climbed higher, two people trying to find their way back from death to life. Behind them, the old graves stood silent witness. And maybe, Sophie thought when she saw them emerge hand in hand, maybe that was how healing began. Not with dramatic forgiveness or perfect understanding, but with the simple, difficult choice to keep walking forward together. Even when the path was impossible to see. 1 year later, the morning sun streamed through the windows of La Vigna, catching dust motes that danced in the light. The restaurant looked different now, brighter, somehow. The heavy drapes had been replaced with sheer curtains. Photographs lined the walls, but these weren't portraits of power and intimidation. These were memories. Lila's gap-toothed smile, Sophie covered in flour from a baking disaster, even one of Marco attempting to frost a birthday cake with the concentration of someone defusing a bomb. And in a place of honor near the host stand, 2 photographs hung side by side in matching frames. Detective James Martinez in his dress uniform, smiling at the camera with the quiet confidence of a man who knew his purpose. Maria Moretti, young and radiant, holding newborn Lila with the fierce protectiveness only mothers understand. In memory of those who sacrificed everything for love. Sophie. The basil is burning. Sophie jerked back to reality, spinning toward the kitchen where smoke was indeed beginning to curl from a pan. She grabbed it off the heat, laughing at her own distraction. Crisis averted. Lila appeared in the kitchen doorway, wearing a miniature chef's apron that matched Sophie's. At 7 years old, she'd shot up 3 inches and lost most of her shyness, though the sadness still surfaced sometimes. Healing, Sophie had learned, wasn't linear. That's the 3rd time this week you've burned the basil, Lila said with the exasperated fondness of someone who'd appointed herself Sophie's keeper. Daddy says if you keep it up, he's banning you from the kitchen. Your daddy can try, Sophie said, tousling Lila's curls. But who else is going to make your favorite pasta? Mama can, Lila said simply, and Sophie's chest warmed at how naturally the word had started coming. Not right away. It had taken months of therapy, of patient conversations, of Maria showing up every single day without pushing. But gradually, memory and trust had begun to rebuild. Maria appeared behind Lila, wiping her hands on a towel. She looked healthier now, the gaunt desperation replaced by something softer. She'd started working in the restaurant kitchen 3 months ago, initially just to be near Lila, but had discovered she actually loved it. Lunch rush starts in 20 minutes, Maria said, surveying the prep work with practiced efficiency. Sophie, can you handle the pasta station? I'll take appetizers. You're the boss, Sophie said with a grin. Actually, Adrian's the boss, Maria corrected, but her smile was warm. I'm just the sous chef who happens to be married to him. Remarried, technically. They'd had a small ceremony 6 months ago, just family and close friends. Lila had been flower girl, scattering petals with the serious concentration she brought to everything important. Sophie had stood as Maria's maid of honor, and Marco had been Adrian's best man, looking deeply uncomfortable in a tuxedo. It wasn't perfect. There were still hard days, difficult conversations, moments when the weight of the lost years pressed down on all of them. But they were building something new from the ashes of what had been destroyed. The lunch crowd trickled in, regulars who'd watched the restaurant's transformation from mob front to legitimate family business. Adrian had spent the past year systematically dismantling his criminal operations, working with federal prosecutors to dismantle the Calabrese family's remaining power structure in exchange for immunity. Vincent was serving 15 years. His father's empire was scattered to the winds. Adrian emerged from the office upstairs, dressed casually in dark jeans and a button-down shirt, looking nothing like the dangerous man Sophie had first met. He'd lost the constant tension that had lived in his shoulders, the wariness that had never left his eyes. He went straight to the counter where Lila was carefully arranging breadsticks in a basket. "How's my favorite chef?" he asked, kissing the top of her head. Saving Sophie from herself, Lila announced. She almost burned the basil again. "I heard." Adrian's eyes found Sophie's across the kitchen, and he smiled, genuine and warm. "Good thing we keep her around for her personality." "And my pasta skills," Sophie called back. "Don't forget those." The day flowed into afternoon, the restaurant filling with laughter and conversation and the clatter of dishes. Sophie moved through it all with a contentment she hadn't known she was searching for. Chicago felt like another lifetime. Her Uncle Ray visited monthly now, finally at peace with the truth about his brother's death. Detective Harris had recovered fully and sometimes stopped by for lunch, regaling them with stories about James Martinez that Sophie treasured. As the last lunch customers filtered out, Lila tugged on Sophie's apron. "Can we do the thing?" Sophie knew exactly what she meant. She grabbed a plate of leftover pasta primavera, the same dish that had started everything, and sat at the corner booth. The same booth where, a year ago, a silent child had first opened her mouth and taken a bite. Lila climbed in across from her, and Sophie loaded a fork with pasta, holding it out. "You know you can feed yourself now, right?" Sophie teased. "I know," Lila said, opening her mouth for the bite anyway. "But this is our thing." Adrian and Maria watched from the kitchen doorway, his arm around her waist, both of them smiling at the sight of their daughter laughing with the woman who'd helped save her. After Lila swallowed, she grabbed the fork and loaded it herself, holding it out to Sophie. "Your turn." Sophie leaned forward and took the bite, just as she had 100 times before. The pasta was perfect, not lonely at all. "Good?" Lila asked. "The best," Sophie confirmed. Marco appeared, carrying a tray of desserts. "Special delivery for the pasta monsters. Tiramisu, made by yours truly. You made this." Lila's eyes widened. "Really?" "Under severe supervision from your mother, but yes," Marco set down the plates with uncharacteristic gentleness. "I'm learning. Turns out I'm better at baking than breaking legs." "That's not hard," Adrian said dryly, coming to join them with Maria. They all squeezed into the booth. Too many people for the space, but none of them caring. This was family now. Complicated, broken, reassembled from pieces that didn't quite match, but somehow fit together anyway. Lila took a bite of tiramisu and declared it almost as good as Mama's, which made Marco laugh and Maria beam with pride. They sat there as afternoon light shifted to evening gold, talking about nothing important. Lila's upcoming school play. Marco's disastrous attempt at making bread. Plans for closing the restaurant for a week, so they could all go to the beach. Lila's first real vacation. Sophie looked around the table at these people who'd become her family through tragedy and choice and stubborn love. Her father would have liked them, she thought. Would have been proud of how they'd all fought their way back to the light. "What are you thinking about?" Maria asked softly. "How lucky I am," Sophie said honestly. "How we all are." Adrian raised his water glass. "To James Martinez. And to second chances." They all raised their glasses, even Lila, serious and solemn. "To Daddy James," Lila added, using the name Sophie had taught her for the man she'd never met but owed everything to. "And to families that find each other." They drank, and the light caught the photographs on the wall, the detective and the mother, watching over the family they died and lived to protect. Outside, New York hummed with its endless energy. But inside La Vigna, in a corner booth that had witnessed miracles, 6 people sat together in the kind of peace that only comes after surviving the fire. Broken people, maybe, scarred by loss and secrets and the violence of the past, but whole in the ways that mattered. And that, Sophie thought as Lila leaned against her shoulder and Adrian smiled at Maria across the table, was more than enough. It was everything. The end.